I sat at the small kitchen table long after midnight, the lamps casting a warm glow over stacks of vendor invoices and my laptop screen blinking with transaction confirmations. My name is Desmond, though in that moment I felt more like a ledger entry than a man. Earlier that evening, I'd finalized the last transfers, $12,500 to the florist, $9,000 to the caterer, and another hefty sum to the decorator who promised ivory drapes and rose gold accents. Every last detail of my daughter's wedding was paid in full by me. I could still taste the bitterness of the burnt toast I'd abandoned in the sink hours ago, a flavor that had settled in my throat as I reviewed the guest list one more time. The house was silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the gentle ticking of the wall clock marking every second that brought me closer to dawn. Then my phone buzzed against the wooden surface, sending a sharp vibration through my chest. I picked it up, expecting another reminder from the venue or an automated alert from my bank confirming the transfers. Instead, an email preview glared up at me in bold type, "Don't come to the wedding." I stared at the subject line as if it were a declaration of war. My heart pounded so loudly I half expected my pulse to register on my phone's accelerometer. With trembling fingers, I tapped the message and watched the body text load. "Just watch the live stream, LOL. Signed, Clarabelle." My ex-wife's name was there, 3 syllables carrying more weight than any profanity. There was no greeting, no apology, no explanation, only a link, mocking me and its economy. I blinked, hoping the screen would refresh with more courteous phrasing. But it remained the same, a digital gauntlet thrown at my feet. I was supposed to feel honored to watch my daughter's most important day streamed in low resolution while everyone I cared about gathered without me. I closed my eyes and let the darkness settle behind my lids, remembering the first wedding gift I'd given Brielle, a tiny music box that played her favorite lullaby. Now that gift felt like a joke. I pressed back to my inbox and scrolled through our past exchanges, tracing the thread of passive-aggressive compliments and carefully worded ultimatums. None of those compared to this. None had slammed the door so definitively. I thought about how I'd supported Clarabelle when she left law school to become a teacher, how I'd coaxed her through nights of grading essays and hugging her tight when she doubted herself. I remembered the proposal, an autumn day in the park, leaves drifting like confetti around us. And I wondered when everything had shifted from partnership to payroll. The kitchen walls felt suddenly too close. I stood and walked over to the counter, running my fingertips across the cold granite as if it might ground me. I replayed the nesting moment when Brielle, at 9 years old, had drawn a picture for me, 2 stick figures beneath a rainbow, the larger labeled Dad and the smaller me. She'd given it to me with a shy smile that lit up her whole face. "So we always remember," she'd said. I taped it to my office wall, but now that colorful memory felt frayed at the edges. I sat back down and opened the banking app where the final payments still showed as completed. The date stamps glowed green, confirmation numbers neatly aligned in a column. My daughter's name sat atop each transaction, a constant reminder that I was the sponsor of her dreams, but not a guest in her story. I tapped the live stream link out of habit, curious if it would at least preview the setup. A loading icon spun in the center of the screen, mocking me again with unmet promise. I tapped it a second time and then a third, but all I got was perpetual buffering. Something in me unraveled at that futile spinning wheel. Putting my phone aside, I reached for my coffee mug, its rim still stained from earlier. The liquid inside had gone cold long before the last transfer had finalized. I took a hesitant sip, wincing at the bitterness, then laid the mug down with more force than necessary. I realized the ritual of paying for every petal and plate hadn't brought me closer to my daughter. It had driven me farther away. Each dollar was a brick in a wall built between us. Clarabelle had handed me the trowel, telling me to keep building, and now she'd slapped the blueprint out of my hand with that cruel LOL. I leaned my head against the back of the chair and closed my eyes. The past year's efforts. Reconciling with Clarabelle after our bitter divorce, co-planning birthday parties and holidays, trying to show Brielle that divorce didn't mean abandonment, fell away in that moment. All of it had been conditional, contingent on my willingness to pay. My presence had been invisible, replaceable, a mere line item on a balance sheet. Slowly, I opened my eyes and straightened up. My reflection in the window looked tired but resolute. I knew I could give until there was nothing left, but what would I have then? A broken heart and an empty bank account. No, this time I wouldn't just swallow the insult. I clicked out of the email client, and opened the vendor list once more, tracing each name with renewed clarity. Tomorrow I would make some changes. Tonight, I would reclaim the stillness. I would let the silence speak for me at last. Because I wasn't just the bank. I was her father. And no amount of money should ever make me forget that. They always called me solid. That was the word people used when they couldn't be bothered to say present, or essential, or even appreciated. Solid. Like a rock at the base of a mountain, enduring, invisible, and taken for granted. I was Desmond, the dependable one. The one who signed tuition checks without delay, who showed up with new tires when Brielle's car gave out at college, who sent monthly grocery stipends even when she stopped calling regularly. Solid was their way of saying I wasn't the kind of man who needed acknowledgement. And for a long time, I played into that identity like it was my role in a long-running play. I convinced myself it was enough to be steady in the background, even if it meant never getting a spotlight. But this was different. After Clarabelle's email hit me like a slap, no invite, just a live stream link, I did something foolish. I opened the shared family album she insisted we use to keep things organized. I hadn't checked it in weeks. She said it was for vendor updates, color swatches, catering samples, all that stuff I paid for but never had a say in. But now the album was filled with pictures from the rehearsal dinner. And not just a few snapshots. Dozens. Full toasts, laughter, group shots in perfect lighting with warm filters. Everyone looked so satisfied, polished, pleased. I scanned the faces, looking for some sign of myself. Some inclusion. Anything. That's when I saw it. One photo, framed beautifully. A wide shot of the dinner table with Clarabelle mid-toast, wine glass raised, Brielle smiling beside her fiancé Caleb. There, near the edge of the frame, was a blur of movement, me, refilling the ice bucket. I stared at that blur, trying to convince myself it was just an unfortunate camera angle. But the more I looked, the more I realized it was exactly how they saw me. Not as someone to be celebrated, just someone who shows up, fixes the drinks, pays the bills, then disappears into the corner. A ghost with a checkbook. And Clarabelle? She was radiant in those pictures. Arms flung around Brielle, cheeks flushed from laughter or wine, maybe both. You'd think she'd organized the entire wedding on her own, and by the looks of it, she wanted everyone else to think that too. No mention of the man footing the bill. No acknowledgement of the father who'd given not just money, but years of his life. I paid for that lighting. I paid for those chairs. Hell, I even paid for the champagne in her glass. And yet, I was the only one uninvited. I thought back to Brielle's graduation. How Clarabelle took center stage for the photo ops. How the speeches leaned heavily on her sacrifices. I didn't argue. I never did. I clapped, took photos, stood to the side like a hired hand proud to be of service. I told myself it didn't matter as long as Brielle was happy. That was always the goal, her happiness. But now, I was starting to wonder, was her happiness built on the condition that I disappear? It wasn't just about the wedding. It was every moment leading to it. Every thanks, Dad, that didn't come. Every question Clarabelle answered for her without even looping me in. Every decision already made before my money was requested. It was the way she looked past me lately, like I was part of the furniture. Functional, familiar, unseen. And now, I wasn't even supposed to be there on her big day. It's a strange thing to fund a celebration you're not allowed to attend. To sit in your own kitchen and scroll through photos of your ex-wife enjoying the fruits of your labor, laughing like you were never part of it. And my daughter? The one who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. The one I taught to ride a bike and watched cry when she scraped her knees. She hadn't even sent a separate message. No explanation. Just silence. Complicity. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it all pressing against my chest. Maybe Clarabelle had manipulated the situation. She was always good at shaping a narrative, at making herself the martyr and me the shadow. But Brielle? She had made a choice too. She'd allowed it. She'd stood by while I was erased. There's a particular ache that comes with realizing your child doesn't defend you. A quiet betrayal, soft and insidious. It doesn't scream like a fight or explode like a lie. It settles in your bones like cold. And it doesn't go away. I opened my messages and scrolled through the months leading up to this. The logistics. The money transfers. The brief, formal replies. Thanks, Dad. Appreciate it. We'll let you know. All business. No warmth. No curiosity. Not once did she ask how I was doing. Not once did she suggest we grab coffee or talk through the plans together. I wasn't a father. I was a function. And now, looking at that blurred photo of me, the man in motion, serving, not seen, it all came into focus. They didn't forget me. They ignored me. They built the dream and decided I didn't belong in it. But I did belong. I wasn't just solid. I was foundational. Without me, there'd be no venue, no flowers, no dinner for them to rehearse. I may have let them write me out of the pictures, but I still held the pen. And I was starting to think it was time to take it back. I still don't know what convinced me to show up. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was desperation for some kind of acknowledgement. Or maybe I was just still clinging to the old belief that fathers belong at their daughters' milestones, even if everything else told me I didn't. The rehearsal dinner was being held at a private event space on the north end of the city. Nothing extravagant, just polished, white-lit, and filled with expensive food and even more expensive people. I wore the gray blazer Brielle once said made me look trustworthy. As I stood outside the glass doors, I stared at my reflection. Not nervous, not angry, just worn. There was no name card for me at the check-in. The young woman at the table, clipboard in hand, scanned the list twice before her brows furrowed. "Sorry, sir, your name isn't on here." I gave her a patient smile. "Try Desmond Taylor." Her finger skimmed again. Nothing. I pulled out my phone and showed her the RSVP confirmation I had received weeks ago. One of the very few direct messages from Brielle. It was a screenshot, not even a proper invite. The girl waved me in anyway. Just sit anywhere that doesn't have a name tag. I stepped inside and was immediately hit by a wall of laughter and music, the kind that only comes when people know they're being watched and want to be remembered fondly. The tables were arranged in perfect rings around a center aisle where someone had already spilled champagne. I scanned the room. Clarabelle stood near the front, surrounded by her usual orbit of admirers, her hands flying as she told some story that had the entire circle bent over in laughter. She looked right past me, then right through me. No recognition, no tension, just practiced indifference. Brielle was there too, radiant in an off-white dress that fluttered just above her knees. She looked older than I remembered, more sculpted. Her arms were linked with Caleb's, her eyes fixed on someone's phone screen as they showed her a video. She laughed, light, effortless, the kind of laugh I used to live for. I raised a hand in a half-hearted wave. She saw me. She definitely saw me. But instead of crossing the room, instead of coming to hug her father, she smiled politely, lifted her fingers in a subtle wave, and turned away. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I let it out in a slow, steady stream. I found table 21 near the back. Actually, not just the back, beside the utility closet, where staff occasionally emerged with trays or napkins or mops, apologizing as they passed me. My table had no candle, no flowers, just a laminated drink menu with a fold at the corner. I sat alone, listening to the clatter of forks and ice and glass, the background noise of people too preoccupied to remember who helped put this whole thing together. No one came to sit with me. At one point, a distant cousin, Angela, I think, offered a faint nod before taking her seat 2 tables away. One of Clarabelle's sisters looked over and tilted her head like she didn't quite place me. I didn't even bother with the wine. The server offered me a plate, steak, buttered asparagus, and mashed potatoes piped like frosting. It looked better than it tasted. I chewed in silence, half listening to the speeches being passed around. Clarabelle toasted first, of course. To Brielle and Caleb, she began, raising her flute. "May your journey be better than mine, and may your love be stronger than your challenges." The crowd laughed politely. I didn't. That wasn't a toast. That was a dagger. She hadn't even bothered to veil the insult. I looked at Brielle again, expecting some flicker of discomfort, but she smiled and clinked her glass, accepting the words like they were a blessing. I wasn't mentioned. Not in the speech, not in the thanks, not in the room. Not really. After dinner, people started moving around. Photographers capturing candidates, bridesmaids forming huddles around Brielle for coordinated shots. I stood, thinking maybe I'd catch her as she walked past. Maybe she'd say something, "Thank you," "Sorry," even just hello. But no, she disappeared into the crowd, one shoulder brushing past mine like a stranger. I looked around. No one noticed I hadn't been included in a single photo. No one commented that I hadn't spoken. I might as well have been part of the architecture, just something convenient to lean against until it's time to leave. A man in a suit carrying a camera case bumped into my chair. "Sorry," he mumbled, without looking. I took that as my cue. I picked up my jacket, nodded to the server clearing glasses nearby, and walked toward the exit. No one followed. No one called out. I stepped outside into the cool air and stood under the awning for a few seconds, letting the night press against me. My phone buzzed. A banking app alert. 3 pending payments scheduled for Monday. The DJ, the videographer, the rental company. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel heartbreak. I just felt erased. I slid into the car and sat there in the dark, hands gripping the wheel without starting the engine. The words from Clarabelle's email came back to me, echoing in my skull like a mantra. Just watch the live stream. LOL. That LOL had haunted me for days, but now it made sense. It wasn't meant to amuse me. It was a final reminder that I was nothing more than a funding source. A ghost with a credit line. I opened the banking app, stared at the scheduled transactions. I didn't cancel them. Not yet. I wanted to sleep on it. I wanted to make sure that when I did it, it came from stillness, not vengeance. The man they wanted me to be was the one who paid, kept his mouth shut, and showed up quietly in the background. But that man was getting tired. That man was vanishing in every photo, in every RSVP list, in every seating chart shoved by the supply closet. I started the engine and drove home with no music on. Just the sound of tires over asphalt. Just the rhythm of breathing in a space where no one asked how I felt or what I needed. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat on the porch with a glass of water and a cooling breeze, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself feel the quiet weight of being unwanted. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. I was just waking up. The morning after the rehearsal dinner, I woke to a gray sky and the kind of stillness that sits heavy on your chest. I moved through my house like a man untethered, not really walking, drifting. My coffee had gone cold by the time I sat down at my desk and pulled up my banking app. 3 scheduled payments stared back at me from the screen, their due dates lined up like a row of dominoes. DJ services, audio-visual crew, and chair rentals. All were tied to tomorrow, all waiting for my authorization. $40,000. Gone in the blink of a tap. I stared at that confirmation screen, my thumb hovering. A small dialog box popped up. Are you sure? This cannot be undone. That sentence made me pause. Not because I had doubts, but because it mirrored something deeper. Clarabelle's email, the blurred photo from the rehearsal, the silence from my daughter. None of it could be undone either. The erasure had already taken place. The insult wasn't the live stream link or the poor seating assignment or the missing name tag. It was the idea that I was dispensable, that I was nothing more than an ATM that wouldn't ask for anything in return. And worst of all, they assumed I'd go along with it. I tapped, yes. The screen blinked. Transfer canceled. Payment revoked. Just like that, I pulled the last thread from their perfect wedding tapestry. I leaned back, letting the quiet settle in again. But this time, it didn't feel like defeat. It felt clean. I wasn't doing this out of pettiness. I wasn't lashing out. I was simply reclaiming my boundaries, ones I had allowed to be bulldozed by years of obligation disguised as love. Clarabelle's LOL hadn't just been cruel. It had been clarifying. I moved to the porch and sat down with a fresh cup of coffee, this one still hot, the steam curling against the cool air. My neighborhood was calm, the kind of place where people mow their lawns in straight lines and wave just enough to feel neighborly. I watched a jogger pass with earbuds in, lost in their own rhythm, and wondered how many people went through life giving and giving until they forgot what being seen felt like. I had loved Brielle with everything I had. Still did. But love, real love, shouldn't demand your silence. It shouldn't weaponize your generosity. I thought back to Brielle's 3rd birthday. We'd rented out a little party hall, and I spent the whole morning inflating balloons because she insisted on having 100 red ones. Clarabelle had shown up late but beamed for every photo. I was the one who cleaned up the spilled juice, who comforted Brielle when the cake collapsed, who drove her home when she fell asleep mid-party. No one remembered those parts. Not then. Not now. What hurt wasn't just being left out. It was the ease with which they all seemed to agree I didn't matter. The ease with which my daughter could smile at me from across her room like I was a distant cousin. The ease with which Clarabelle could laugh and toast and tell her little jab-laced jokes while holding a glass I paid for. I took another sip of coffee and let the bitterness coat my mouth like armor. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt grounded. For years, I had confused being needed with being valued. I thought the invoices and the check-ins and the timely transfers were the way I earned a seat at the table. But I was never supposed to buy my place. That seat should have always been mine, because I'm her father. That morning, I started deleting calendar reminders. Venue coordination call? Gone. Final balance for tuxedo rentals? Gone. Reminder to follow up with the videographer? Gone. I deleted each one like an old photo that no longer brought joy. One after another, the obligations dissolved until my calendar looked like freedom. It wasn't until I turned off my laptop that I realized I wasn't shaking. No anger trembled beneath my skin. No guilt lurked behind my calm. I had simply reached a point where the silence felt like an answer. They hadn't called. They hadn't texted. Not Brielle. Not Clarabelle. Because deep down, they assumed I'd do what I always did. Absorb the disrespect and keep funding the fantasy. But not this time. This time, the silence was mine. My choice. My line in the sand. It was around noon when I got the first alert. A missed call from Sabine, the wedding coordinator. Then a text. Hey, Mr. Taylor, quick question. Did something change with the vendor payments? Some of them are flagging as canceled. Let me know. Thanks. I didn't respond. 3 minutes later, another message. Hi again. Just trying to get ahead of any confusion before the big day. Please call when you can. Still, I said nothing. Because what was there to explain? No one had explained why I'd been left out. No one had explained why Clarabelle had the audacity to send that link with a laugh. No one had explained why my daughter didn't defend me, didn't insist that her father deserved a place of honor, or even a proper seat. And now, they wanted explanations? No, I had given too many of those already. I had explained my presence. I had explained my love. I had explained my importance. Constantly, tirelessly, quietly. Now I let my absence do the talking. The day wore on. I ignored the increasing flurry of pings, each one proof that my silence spoke louder than every dollar I'd sent. Sabine, the DJ, even the venue manager. One by one, they reached out trying to patch the hole I'd finally torn open by simply stepping away. I imagined Clarabelle pacing her living room, trying to sweet-talk vendors or bluff her way through unpaid balances. I imagined Brielle, still in her makeup chair, not knowing the centerpieces had been canceled or that the string quartet wouldn't be showing up. I wasn't ruining anything. I was simply stepping out of the role they had written for me, the one where I was silent and dependable and invisible. I wasn't that man anymore. That night, I cooked for myself. Just a simple meal, grilled fish, vegetables, and rice. No takeout. No distractions. Just me and the sizzle of the skillet. And while I ate, I thought not about the wedding, but about everything I'd tolerated in the name of peace. When I went to bed, I slept deeply. No tossing. No dreams. Just stillness. The $40,000 was still in my account. But more importantly, so was my self-respect. Sunday afternoon arrived like a slow drum roll I could feel in my spine. It was supposed to be a celebratory day, the eve of my daughter's wedding. Instead, I was staring at my phone, watching it buzz, watching names flash across the screen like emergency flares. Malik, my cousin, was the first to reach out. He'd always been the buffer in our family, the one with the soft voice and diplomatic phrasing. His message came in just before 1 p.m. They want to talk. Just hop on the Zoom. Please, Des. Just hear them out. I didn't want to hear them out. I wanted peace. But some old part of me, maybe the same part that once coached Brielle through math homework while Clarabelle was out with friends, whispered, "You should listen, just in case." So I clicked the link. Regret crept in before the call even connected. Clarabelle's face filled the screen first, perfectly composed as always. Even through the pixelation, she managed to look polished. The pearls, the pressed blouse, that same expression she wore at our divorce hearing, a blend of calm and disdain. "You've always been dramatic, Desmond," she said, without so much as a hello. "This isn't about you." The words were sharp, rehearsed. She wasn't here to listen, just to correct. Then Brielle appeared on screen, her face smaller than I remembered, but still carrying the softness that once made me melt when she smiled. Except now, her eyes were tight, defensive. "I just didn't want tension," she said, her voice careful. "You and Mom in the same room. It's always a lot." I took a slow breath. "So your solution was to disinvite me?" She blinked. "It wasn't like that. It's just, we thought it would be easier." We. The word struck me harder than I expected. Not Clarabelle thought. We. My daughter had made this decision with her mother, and I was just an afterthought. An obstacle. An accessory they could remove for convenience. Clarabelle jumped back in, her tone clipped. You're ruining the biggest day of her life, Desmond. I smiled. Not the kind of smile you offer when something's funny. The kind that comes when you realize just how little you matter to the people you once sacrificed everything for. No, I said calmly. I'm just not paying for it. The silence that followed was deep. Not static, not buffering. Just silence. Clarabelle's lips parted like she had something locked and loaded, but nothing came out. Brielle looked stunned, like I'd just spoken a foreign language. You stopped the payments? She asked, voice faltering now. I did. But why would you do that? I tilted my head. You told me to watch the live stream, Brielle. You said it so casually, like I was never supposed to be there in the first place. You didn't call. You didn't ask me how I felt. You didn't even pretend I was part of this. Clarabelle jumped in again, sharp and indignant. You're overreacting. No, I replied, eyes steady on hers through the screen. I'm reacting appropriately. For the first time in years, they didn't know what to do with that. The man who always compromised, always gave in, always made things easier. He was gone. And in his place was someone who'd finally learned the cost of being too quiet for too long. Brielle leaned in closer to the camera. Dad, I didn't mean to hurt you. I believe that, I said, and I did. But intentions don't erase outcomes. But you did. And now you're upset not because I'm hurt, but because the wedding's in trouble. Clarabelle scoffed. Unbelievable. You're holding her day hostage. I shook my head. No, I just stopped sponsoring a party I wasn't invited to. Brielle's lips quivered slightly. I didn't think you'd actually pull out. That's the problem, sweetheart, I said softly. You counted on my silence. You expected me to pay without question, to disappear quietly while you celebrated a milestone I helped build. She looked down. Clarabelle stepped in, voice tight with authority. You're punishing her for my decisions. She didn't write that email, but she didn't stop you from sending it either. The words hung there, undeniable. They didn't ask me anything else after that. Clarabelle tried to pivot, to negotiate in that practiced way of hers, but I muted the call. I let them speak into the void while I sat back and watched their panic mount behind their forced smiles. I didn't feel cruel. I didn't feel smug. I felt justified. This wasn't revenge. This was clarity. I ended the call 5 minutes later without unmuting. No dramatic send-off. No farewell speech. Just a quiet click, and then peace. The phone didn't stop buzzing for the next hour. Texts, missed calls, voice messages. Some angry. Some pleading. Some trying to explain what couldn't be explained. I ignored them all. Let the noise pile up like junk mail. They had used my silence as consent for years. Now I was using it as a boundary. Because the truth was simple. I didn't pull funding to hurt them. I pulled it because I realized I was the only one still pretending this was love. I had mistaken compliance for loyalty. I had believed that being useful meant being included. But I wasn't family to them. I was a financier. And I'm done being the background of my own story. I poured myself a glass of water and stepped outside, letting the breeze hit my face. The sun was beginning to fall low in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the pavement. The kind of light that makes you feel like the day is exhaling. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not pride, not power. Peace. They could rage. They could scramble. They could whisper and whine and twist this story any way they wanted. But I wouldn't be tuning in. No live stream. No call-in. No seat in the back. I was done buying my way into a celebration that didn't see me. And for once, my absence would speak louder than anything they ever let me say aloud. Monday morning began with the kind of quiet that feels deliberate, like the world was holding its breath. My phone rang at 7:02 a.m. Clarabelle. Then again at 7:04. Brielle followed at 7:06. Clarabelle again at 7:08. I didn't answer. Not once. I didn't even flinch when the screen lit up with their names. Instead, I laced up my shoes, slid my keys into my jacket pocket, and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The sky was a soft gray, and the sidewalk was still damp from a drizzle overnight. I made my way toward the cafe downtown, the same one where I used to take Clarabelle for Sunday brunch, the one where we made vacation plans back when vacations were a thing we could afford, before resentment had replaced laughter. I ordered a double espresso, sat by the window, and watched people move past with purpose. Students, nurses, bus drivers, workers in pressed shirts and tired eyes. Life going on, unaware of my quiet revolution. The first message came through at 7:29. Clarabelle again. Please call me. It's urgent. By 8 o'clock, they were flooding in. They won't let the flowers through. The venue says it needs payment authorization. Brielle's crying, Desmond, please, just do the right thing. The right thing. As if I hadn't been doing the right thing for 25 years. As if funding every milestone, every emergency, every last-minute demand hadn't been my default. What they really meant was, do the thing that keeps us comfortable. Do the thing that keeps you quiet. I took another sip of espresso, let the bitterness sit on my tongue. I could imagine the panic building. Clarabelle in full crisis mode, voice clipped, blaming vendors and assistants, deflecting like it was all a technical glitch. She would never admit the foundation was crumbling because it had been built on exclusion and entitlement. I scrolled through my messages slowly, letting each one settle before deleting it. Sabine, the coordinator, had chimed in now. Good morning, Mr. Taylor. We've hit a snag with some of the service confirmations. I believe there's been a freeze on funding. Just trying to sort it all out before load-in. Load-in? What a clinical way to describe a ceremony that had excluded me from its very core. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The silence was intentional now, surgical. They had used it like a weapon for so long, expecting I'd always chase them down, bridge the gap, apologize for how I felt. Now it was their turn to sit in the unknown, to wonder where they stood. By 8:45, Brielle tried again. Dad, please. Can we just talk? I never wanted this to happen. Still, I said nothing. Instead, I stood, walked the length of downtown, past the museum we used to visit when Brielle was a child. I remembered her running up the marble steps, her tiny hand gripping mine, tugging me toward the dinosaur exhibit. She used to look at me like I knew everything, like I was invincible. Somewhere along the way, that look changed. It became passive, distant, as if I were part of a system she tolerated but no longer revered. At 9:10, another message came in. The decorator says they won't bring the linens without the balance. We're trying to stall, but it's getting embarrassing. Embarrassing. That was the real concern now. Not the exclusion. Not the betrayal. Just the optics. I stopped by the bridge over the river and stood for a moment, looking down at the current, steady and uncaring. I wondered what would have happened if I'd just let everything go through. If I had swallowed the hurt and watched the wedding on that live stream like a good little ghost in the machine, would they have even remembered to thank me? Would Brielle have acknowledged me at all? Or would I have become a footnote in a story that starred Clarabelle as the loving mother and me as the man who couldn't be there? No, this was better. Harder, but better. At 9:32, Clarabelle tried again. They're threatening to cancel the tent setup. This isn't the time for games. Games. She still didn't see it. Still didn't understand that I wasn't playing. I was leaving the table. I'd finally realized I didn't have to keep funding my own erasure. At 9:47, Brielle's voice message came through. I hesitated. Then I listened. Dad, I know you're mad. I know Mom made some decisions without talking to you, but I didn't mean for it to be like this. I thought it would just be easier to avoid the tension. I thought you'd understand. But now everything's falling apart, and I don't know what to do. I just want you to be proud of me tomorrow. I just want this day to work. Please. I paused the message before it ended, not out of anger, but because I finally understood something. She wanted my pride, my approval, but not my presence. She wanted my legacy, my labor, my love, just not me. And that's what had to end. I spent the rest of the morning walking, letting the tension bleed out of my shoulders. The air smelled like rain and distant coffee. I passed couples, joggers, parents pushing strollers, people who were living their lives without needing to be invited to participate in them. I let myself imagine what life might look like if I stopped auditioning for roles I'd already outgrown. By 11:15, the call slowed, not because the panic ended, but because the reality had settled. I wasn't going to save the wedding. They'd made their choices, and I'd made mine. At noon, I returned home, phone on silent, inbox full. I poured another coffee, stood at the window, and watched the wind tug at the trees. There was something deeply healing about the quiet. The absence of obligation. The meltdown was theirs now. For once, I wasn't going to carry it. By noon, the chaos reached its next stage, external fallout. I had barely stepped out of the shower when another ping came through. This time, it wasn't Clarabelle or Brielle. It was Sabine. Again. Mr. Taylor, we're having some serious issues. A few vendors are already backing out. Can you please confirm if you've changed the payment status? I need clarity before I lose the rest of them. I stood there for a moment, towel slung over my shoulder, water still dripping from my hair. Clarity. That word again. Everyone wanted it now, but no one had offered it to me when they shut the door and slid a live stream link under it like a consolation prize. I typed back only 3 words. All funding revoked. I watched the dots appear on the screen, Sabine typing a response, then stop, then start again, then disappear. 15 minutes later, she called. Twice. I didn't pick up. Not because I was trying to be cruel, but because, for the first time in years, I understood the power of disengagement. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't ranting. I wasn't even explaining myself anymore. I was just done. Done pretending this was a misunderstanding. Done pretending that Clarabelle hadn't orchestrated this exclusion with surgical precision. Done pretending that Brielle had no agency in it. I made a sandwich. Simple. Turkey, lettuce, mustard. I ate it slowly while reading the paper like it was any other Monday. Because, in a way, it was. The world hadn't stopped just because their curated day was unraveling. But I could picture it. The decorators arriving only to be told the payment didn't clear. The DJ checking his app to see his deposit reversed. The tent rental team pulling up to the venue, waiting for a green light that never came. And Sabine, trying to keep a smile on her face while silently calculating how much of the wedding could be salvaged without the man they'd all written out of the narrative. The image didn't make me smile. It didn't make me feel vindicated. It just felt honest. Finally, at 1:30, I walked around the block to clear my head. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. A neighbor waved at me from his porch. I waved back. Normal. Human. Real. By the time I returned home, another message waited for me. From Clarabelle. Are you really going to let your daughter's wedding implode over hurt feelings? This isn't the time to be petty. Petty. That's what it always came down to with her. If I had a boundary, it was pettiness. If I stood up for myself, it was overreaction. If I dared ask for basic respect, I was difficult, unreasonable, dramatic. I didn't respond, because I knew the truth. And truth didn't require validation to exist. By 3 o'clock, a second message came in, this one longer. It was Sabine again. Mr. Taylor, I don't want to overstep, but we really are struggling. Brielle's very upset, and Clarabelle is, well, she's blaming everyone. A few of the vendors have packed up. I'm doing everything I can, but I have to ask, is there any chance you'll reconsider? Even partial funding? I just want to make the day work for Brielle. Please let me know what's possible. I stared at that last line. What's possible? It was always about what was possible for everyone else. What about me? What had ever been possible for me? The father who showed up with checkbooks in silence, who stood behind the scenes like a stagehand, expected to lift and support without a spotlight, without thanks? The wedding had never been built to include me. I wasn't in the plans. I wasn't in the speeches. I wasn't even in the acknowledgments. I was just the back-end funding. And yet they still expected me to save it. I powered off my phone. Not just silent. Off. Then I sat by the window with a glass of water, watching the sky deepen from blue to gold. Birds landed on the power lines like notes on a staff. A rhythm in the chaos. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was bracing for anything. The storm had come and gone, and I was still standing. There was no joy in their panic. No satisfaction in watching it fall apart. There was only relief. A deep, grounding relief that I didn't have to carry this anymore. That I had finally stopped enabling the very behavior that excluded me. That I had remembered who I was outside of what I gave. Somewhere in a hotel room across town, Clarabelle was probably pacing, her voice low and lethal, slicing through assistants and relatives alike. Brielle was probably curled up in a chair, surrounded by half-stuffed gift bags and bouquets that wouldn't be delivered, wondering how it had come to this. Wondering why I didn't bend. But I wasn't bending anymore. I was rebuilding. Without them. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. Because sometimes love means stepping back. Sometimes peace means walking away from a table where your name was never printed on the place cards. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stop explaining your worth to people who've already decided it doesn't count unless it's wrapped in currency. That afternoon, I didn't call anyone. I didn't draft a statement. I didn't justify my silence. I simply let it stand. Like truth. Like dignity. like a man finally choosing himself. By the time night settled in, the house was dark except for the low glow of the kitchen light. I was sitting at the table, a second cup of coffee going cold in front of me, when the phone rang again. I didn't check the screen. I already knew who it was. This time, I let it ring. Then, against my better judgment, I answered. Clarabelle's voice came through quieter than usual. No sharpness, no immediate accusation. Just a small, uneven breath on the other end. I messed up, Des. The silence on my end stretched. Not because I was unsure of what to say, but because I wanted her to feel it. The absence of my immediate forgiveness. The boundary that now stood where a bridge used to be. I didn't mean to hurt you, she continued. I was trying to keep things simple. I thought the live stream would be enough. I scoffed, but quietly. The way you react when something is so absurd you don't even have the energy to fight it. A live stream, I said flatly. Right. That's what fathers get these days. Clarabelle's voice cracked like paper in a humid room. I didn't know it would come across that way. You didn't know? I said. You sent a message with LOL after telling me not to come to our daughter's wedding. That wasn't ignorance. That was cruelty dressed in casual. She went quiet for a moment. I could almost hear her pacing, as if movement would unlock better words. But they didn't come. Instead, she tried a different angle. Brielle wants you there now, she said, softer this time. She's in her room crying. She says she can't do this without you. She regrets not speaking up. I closed my eyes, breathing through the sudden twist in my chest. Not because I didn't love Brielle. I did, endlessly, but because I learned that love doesn't mean rescuing people from the consequences of choices they were old enough to make. Let me guess, I said. That realization came after the flowers didn't show up. After the vendors started pulling out. After the fantasy started to unravel. Clarabelle didn't deny it. Which, in its own way, said everything. She wants to fix this, she said finally. We all do. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. No. What you want is for me to patch the cracks you caused, so the show can go on without anyone knowing what happened behind the curtain. Desmond, do you even hear yourself? I cut in. Do you understand what it feels like to be treated like a ghost who just happens to carry a wallet? To be excluded, dismissed, and then called only when the money stops. Clarabelle's voice dropped to a whisper. I thought you'd understand the position we were in. I thought you'd see that it wasn't personal. It was personal to me, I said. All of it. There was a beat of silence. Then another. You've always been the good guy, she said. The one who keeps the peace. I guess I didn't think you'd ever push back. And there it was. The confession, clean and honest. She hadn't expected resistance because I'd trained them not to. I'd been too agreeable, too giving, too desperate to stay involved. I'd made myself a doormat and then resented them for wiping their feet. I took a deep breath, let it settle into the space between us. If you can live with that decision, Clarabelle, I said slowly, then I'm sure the live stream will be lovely. She let out a small, wounded sound. That's it. No, I said. That's peace. You made your choices. You orchestrated a celebration that excluded the man who paid for it. And now that the foundation is crumbling, you're calling the builder. But I'm not coming in to hold up a house I was never welcome in. But Brielle remembered I was her father when the budget collapsed, I said. That's not love. That's accounting. Clarabelle didn't speak again. I could hear her breathing, could sense the tears she didn't want me to hear falling on the other end. And maybe the old version of me would have softened then, would have asked if she was okay, would have driven across town to be the hero again. But not this time. I'll always love Brielle, I said, voice steady. But I won't keep teaching her that it's okay to treat someone like a resource instead of a relationship. I won't teach her that she can disappear me and expect me to show up with a smile and a check. I thought we were past this, she murmured. No, I said. You thought I was past myself. And with that, I ended the call. No slam. No yell. Just a quiet, final click. I sat there, staring at my coffee, gone cold again. The clock on the wall ticked past 9, and the house was silent. But this silence wasn't empty, it was full. Full of boundaries, full of resolve, full of the self-worth I had bartered for years in exchange for proximity to people who saw me only in terms of usefulness. I poured the coffee down the sink, rinsed the mug, and turned off the light. Tomorrow, they'd either go through with the wedding stripped of its grandeur, or they'd cancel it altogether. But either way, they would know this. I wasn't invisible, and I wasn't coming back just because the budget asked me to. I didn't check my phone that morning. I didn't check the live stream link. I didn't scroll through texts, emails, or missed calls. I woke up slowly, made myself breakfast, eggs, toast, avocado, and sat on the back porch with my coffee as the sun climbed over the rooftops. There was a stillness to the air that felt earned. Not the kind of silence that comes after defeat, but the kind that follows a firm decision finally kept. It was supposed to be Brielle's wedding day. The day that months of planning, hundreds of hours, and over $40,000 were supposed to culminate in perfection. The dress, the music, the photos, the toasts. A fairy tale, and I had no plans to be part of it, not even as a spectator. Instead, I packed a water bottle, grabbed my boots, and headed out of the city to hike a trail I hadn't visited in years. It wound through a forest preserve about 45 minutes away, with tall pines that created a cathedral of light overhead. The ground was soft from the week's rain, and the only sounds were birdsong and the crunch of my steps through fallen leaves. As I walked, my mind wandered to a time when Brielle was 8 and convinced fairies lived in trees. We used to hike this very trail, stopping at every hollow trunk to leave notes written on torn notebook paper. She talked to them like old friends. And back then, she used to look at me like I was magic, like her father could do anything. That memory stayed with me through every bend in the trail. By the time I reached the summit, the sun was high and the breeze cool against my back. I sat on a flat rock and looked out over the hills, the city a distant blur on the horizon. I knew what was probably happening down there. Or rather, not happening. No flowers. The florist had confirmed cancellation after the deposit was revoked. No violinist, their deposit had bounced after the freeze. No catering. An apology email had even been sent out by the manager, stating incomplete authorization. And the guests? They would have started arriving in their best dresses and sharp suits, expecting elegance, only to find confusion. Half the chairs missing. No music playing. No champagne being passed. People whispering behind manicured hands. Faces stiff with embarrassment as Clarabelle tried to explain. I could imagine her pacing back and forth, voice tight, palms sweating, blaming the coordinator, blaming technical issues, maybe even blaming me. Because that's what people like her do when the foundation crumbles, they scramble for a scapegoat. But this wasn't sabotage. It was consequence. Brielle, I imagined, was upstairs in the bridal suite, surrounded by chaos. Hair half done. Makeup artist on standby. Sabine on the phone with the linen company again. Bridesmaids asking what to tell the guests. And Brielle, my daughter, likely sitting in her gown, tears smudging mascara, wondering how it all fell apart. But the truth? It had been falling apart for months. Years, even. This wasn't about a wedding. It was about the slow erosion of respect. The casual dismissal. The assumption that I would always be there, check in hand, smile in place, silent and invisible. And now that I wasn't, everything they thought was permanent cracked. I didn't smile at the thought. I didn't gloat. This wasn't vengeance. This was survival. This was the first time in decades that I chose not to fund my own mistreatment. As I sat there watching a hawk circle in the sky, my phone buzzed once in my pocket. Then again. Then it went quiet. I didn't check it. I let it sit there, a forgotten part of a life I no longer felt bound to serve. I closed my eyes and leaned back, letting the rocks support me, letting the sunlight warm my face. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free, not just from obligations, but from the lie I'd been living. The lie that said love requires sacrifice, even when that sacrifice is yourself. I stayed on that rock for a long time. Long enough to know the ceremony time had come and gone. Long enough to know that if the wedding had proceeded, it had done so bare-boned and brittle. When I finally made my way down the trail and returned to my car, the afternoon sun was beginning to dip. I sat in the driver's seat, not turning the key just yet, and pulled out my phone. 27 new messages. I didn't open a single one. The previews were enough. Please just explain why. Brielle is devastated. You'll regret this. It's not too late. But it was. It had been too late the moment they sent me a digital invitation to a celebration I had funded but wasn't welcome at. Too late the moment Brielle didn't think to call me herself before letting her mother send that message. Too late the moment they built a world I wasn't part of, then asked me to pay for the view. I turned off the phone again, placed it in the glove box, and drove home with the windows down. The city passed me by in blurred fragments. Billboards, buses, people rushing from one thing to another. But I was in no rush. I had already arrived. Home was quiet when I returned. The porch still warm from the afternoon sun. I sat there with a glass of water and watched the shadows stretch across the yard. Somewhere across town, a wedding had collapsed, not because I destroyed it, but because I stopped holding it up. Let them think what they want. Let them twist the story. I knew the truth, and I had made peace with it. Sometimes, the only way to be heard is to stop speaking, and sometimes, the only way to be valued is to walk away. 3 weeks later, I closed the door to my old life with the same quiet finality I had learned to embrace. No ceremony, no public farewell. Just me, a rental truck, and a new lease in a city where no one knew my name. I left the blinds open on that first night, letting the light from unfamiliar street lamps settle across the bare hardwood floors of my new apartment. There were no wedding photos to hang, no boxes marked memories, just practical things. Clothes, books, dishes, a single armchair I'd kept because it was mine and had always been mine. The silence wasn't lonely. It was earned. The move hadn't been planned, not at first. But after the wedding, that unceremonious unraveling I had refused to fund, I felt something inside me shift. Staying would mean opening myself back up to the same old dynamics. The unspoken expectations. The subtle shaming. The way Brielle would text for help but never ask how I was. The way Clarabelle might pretend nothing happened and resume the habit of packaging guilt with pleasantries. No, I couldn't go back. So I didn't. I got a job offer 2 towns over. Smaller firm. Calmer pace. Better hours. It wasn't a promotion, it was a recalibration. A choice to stop living in places where I felt like a footnote. I didn't announce the move. I didn't throw a going-away dinner. I told Malik, who helped me lift the heavier boxes, and left the rest behind. 3 weeks, and not a word from Clarabelle. Brielle had messaged once, just once. I didn't see it then. I do now. That was all she wrote. No attachment. No emojis. No explanations. Just those 8 words. And it was enough. Because what I'd needed wasn't revenge. It wasn't groveling or even repair. It was recognition. A sign that she'd finally looked back and seen not just the collapse of a wedding day, but the foundation she had unknowingly helped crack. Her words didn't fix everything, but they were a start. A small thread, offered without a tug. I replied 2 days later. I still love you. But love doesn't mean funding disrespect. I'll always be your father. But I won't be your doormat. She didn't respond. Not right away. And I didn't need her to. The truth is, I'd spent years teaching the people around me how to treat me. By staying silent. By overgiving. By accepting apologies without change. I had taught them that I would show up, no matter how invisible they made me feel. And when I finally stopped, it wasn't just shocking, it was seismic. That's what people don't tell you about reclaiming yourself. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's not always a speech or a confrontation. Sometimes, it's just a quiet withdrawal. An empty seat. A payment that doesn't go through. A voicemail that doesn't get returned. And slowly, the world rearranges itself without the weight you used to carry for everyone else. In my new city, I developed new routines. Mornings started with walks along the river. Evenings ended with jazz and a glass of wine. No one here knew who I had been, just who I was now. A man who had once given too much and finally learned to ask himself, but what about me? I kept in touch with Brielle on my terms. A few texts here and there. A birthday call. I didn't force closeness. I didn't try to reclaim some sanitized father-daughter fairy tale. I let things grow again, not from guilt or pressure, but from truth. And slowly, she began to show signs of reckoning. One afternoon, I got a message from her. I've been thinking about everything. You were always there. I just didn't see you. I stared at that line for a long time. Grief and gratitude danced in equal measure behind my ribs. I know, I replied. And now you do. No over-explanation. No rehashing. Just mutual acknowledgement. The kind that doesn't try to rewrite the past, but lets it stay where it is. Clarabelle, on the other hand, remained silent. I don't know if it was shame or pride or some warped version of self-preservation, but I didn't hear from her after that last call. And truthfully, I didn't miss her voice. Not the version of her I'd come to know. We had built something once, yes. A life. A daughter. A decade of moments. Some beautiful, some broken. But some people grow from the ashes. Others just sit in the smoke. I chose growth. And to anyone reading this, anyone who's ever been sidelined, used, or reduced to a utility instead of a human being, hear me. You're not selfish for stepping back. You're not heartless for drawing a line. You are allowed to love people and still say, "Not like this." You are allowed to want connection that's reciprocal. You are allowed to stop showing up for people who only notice your absence when it threatens their comfort. I once believed being dependable meant being indispensable. But now I know better. Dependability without dignity is just quiet exploitation. The cleanest goodbyes are not always spoken. Sometimes they look like a check left unsigned, a name left off a registry, a guest not in the background, but gone entirely. And that silence? That space? It's where self-respect begins again.